Hello happy writers, I'm Steve Sommin and welcome to my channel. So, really excited today because we're going to be talking about pace. Well, at least my thoughts on how to create pace and what it's for. Before we do that, please hit the subscribe button and then ring the bell so you get notifications every time I drop a video. So pace, what is it? I've seen quite a few people giving advice on pace, so I want to do something a little bit more in depth. For me, I think it helps to think of pace as being the perceived amount of time that it takes to complete an action or a set of actions. Now, that doesn't mean that it should take literally as long to read it as it does to actually do those actions in real life. Some of the things that we're trying to get across when we're changing the pace in our writing is things like boredom, anticipation, excitement, stress, passion, panic, surprise. So when you're writing, it's helpful if you understand the actual feelings the characters have at that point in the writing, because that will actually shape and determine the kind of pace that you want to be writing with. So how do we change the pace? Well, there is this idea that the more you describe an action with a sense of time helps to create a slower pace. If the pace needs to be quicker, then you need more information, more actions within the same amount of writing. By doing this, you'll probably find that you need to use more sentences, shorter sentences, for much faster action. And as to how fast you can make the pace, well, if you want to take it to the extremes, then you can use incomplete sentences or just single words. But to be honest, they usually only work well in dialogue. Basically, that's how we create pace. But how do you use pace in your narrative? It's quite common to have a building pace. So you start with quite long sentences that are quite descriptive, and then you shorten them as you're going through the narrative. It would be really difficult to do this over an entire book, but it's definitely doable over a few paragraphs or over a chapter. This is a really good technique that's used quite often in drama and in music because it's like building up to a climax. But you can't use this in every single chapter. Another way to do this is to have the rising and falling pace. So you start off slow, you build up to a faster pace, and then you drop down to a much slower pace at the end. In using this technique, what you can have is like a little bit of a climax in the middle of your chapter, and when you drop it off towards the end, you're going to be getting some ideas about maybe wonderment or indecision and stuff like that, which actually takes up a little bit more time, unless you're going to have a very decisive character who makes decisions at the drop of a hat. So the next one is what I call a drop-off. You've got a moderate pace going through the first couple of paragraphs, and then the next paragraph is just boom in the floor and really slow. And you're going to use this for things like wonderment, confusion, and stuff like that. Something that may require some self-reflection or actually needs a bit more of description so that we can actually take on board what's actually happening at that point. You can have the inverse as well, which can be an explosion of speed. So you can start off fairly slow and then boom, everything's going so much faster and the reader is like, oh, what's going on? I would point out that it's probably best not to do this from the extremes, so from extremely slow to extremely fast. You only need to slow it down a little bit for it to have real contrast between the two sets of pace to actually make that impact on the reader. If you take it too far, it can just seem ridiculous. Though there are exceptions to the rules, obviously. Another way we can use pace is to use it a bit like a dance. So think of a waltz. Fast, fast, slow. It's not great to use it through an entire chapter, but it can actually be quite effective in some moderately fast-paced action scenes and stuff like that. The next one is a holding pattern. Basically, it's a monotonous pace. So you don't want to do this through an entire chapter because it would just make the chapter boring, and we don't want to do that. So what do we use a holding pattern for? Well, usually we use holding patterns that are quite slow paced so that we can get across this sense of boredom, of waiting, maybe anticipation. I personally would only do this for about 2 to 3 paragraphs at most before I change the pace again, because I want to keep the reader engaged. And while a lot of people think that having a moderately fast pace all the way through their book, never dropping the pace down to a certain level, is going to be better and it will drive the reader on further, it's not always the case. Sometimes a reader is more than happy to sit there in this holding pattern so as they get a sense of what's going on, how the character's feeling, and it also gives them a bit of time to take in all the action that may have been happening around it. So that begs the question, how do we know if the pacing is right? Well, that question is really easy. All you need to do is to consider the feelings and thoughts of the character doing the things that they are doing and how they would perceive that time as passing. While we think of time as being a constant, that the second hand never speeds up or slows down, we have to remember that a watched kettle never boils. If your character's being really active, then I'm pretty sure that the time will actually pass a little quicker. If they're doing something that's boring, then that time will actually pass really slowly. Imagine watching paint dry for 5 minutes. It can feel like a lifetime. How can you use pace to drive the reader on? Well, I would say use the pace to play with the reader's expectations. Or use pace to actually build expectations. Well, I do love an explosion of pace or a drop-off on pace in the right places. I do believe that most of the time when we're using pace and increasing pace, it should be more of a build-up. And pace should be reflective of the emotions of the character, and the characters don't just have sudden emotions. The emotions come from somewhere, and their intensity builds over a few sentences, a few paragraphs, or even an entire chapter or two. I also think that you should have a little bit of a pickup in the pace towards the end of a chapter so that you run the reader into the next chapter. They're already going at such a pace and they feel it, and believe it or not, even though they read at a constant speed, they will actually feel like they're moving faster and will just turn over the page. Just so we're clear, these are just my opinions on how to create pace and how to use pace. All I'm saying is, if my opinions are going to help you out here and are actually going to help you to improve your writing, or have taught you something new that you hadn't considered, then I am more than happy. If all it's done is reaffirm what you understand about pace, then I'm also happy, because it's always great when you find out that you're not alone in the way that you think. Remember, you are gonna be a writer. If you like this content and you want to see more, please like, share and subscribe. Then hit that bell so you get notifications on my next video. Until next time, bye.